Now, 200 homes were damaged, leaving 2 dead, hundreds destitute, and the area engulfed in toxic sludge on the 11th of September, when a dam wall at a mine collapsed. Jagersfontein Developments is now attempting to make a settlement agreement with the people who lost their homes and property. To discuss this further, we are joined by human rights attorney Richard Spoor. Thank you so much for your time, Richard. We do appreciate it. Now, many would say, what's so wrong with the settlement? People are trying to help the victims who lost everything. But maybe just get into the finer details about this actual settlement and how these victims are almost being forced to sign the settlement. What is in the detail?
Well, the mine has accommodated about 160 families, those whose homes were worst damaged, in temporary accommodation. They're in that accommodation on a month-to-month basis. They don't know when that accommodation will be come to an end. They've all lost their homes. They've lost all their personal belongings. When we have attempted to engage with the mine on behalf of our clients, the mine has refused to discuss any kind of settlement or any accommodation. You know, we've asked them, will you take responsibility? They've refused to answer that question. What they've done now is they're approaching the victims individually and saying to them, sign this agreement, and then we will build you a house somewhere, sometime, at our discretion. List the property you've lost, and if you can prove that you have lost it to our satisfaction, we will replace it. So in effect, they're asking people to sign over, to give the mine an indemnity, and in return, they will replace their homes to a standard determined by them and replace their property to the extent that the mine chooses to replace the property. There is no provision for loss of income. There's no provision for any hardship that they've endured. And there's no provision for personal injury claims. A number of people were injured and hospitalized. And of course, we've had 3 people who are dead and missing. So we feel this is a one-sided, unilateral contract that's being imposed on people. And their understanding is that if they refuse to sign, they will be kicked out of their houses and they won't get replacement housing in the future.
But surely that's not allowed, Richard. Do you think that they are being forced to sign this settlement because they're trying to cover something up? What do you think is behind this forcing of signing of the settlement?
It's an attempt to achieve a cheap settlement, to get people to sign away their rights so that the mine, at its discretion, can decide precisely how, where, and when to compensate them. You know, considering that the mine is liable for this disaster, I mean, at law and socially, you know, it is unconscionable what they're doing.
It's rather concerning also, given months later, nothing has really been done, or nobody has really come out to take responsibility and accountability for what really happened. You've been rather vocal with this particular matter. Are you going to be supporting and helping those that, I'm going to use the word forced, to sign the settlements? Are you going to get involved in any way?
We are. I'll be in Jagersfontein on Thursday. I've got a meeting with the local municipality, meeting with our clients, leading with civil society organizations in the community, and we'll be working very hard to stop this. Our view is if there are people who are coerced into signing this kind of settlement agreement, those agreements will also be challenged. We are deeply concerned, however, that you know, it's not just the silence of the mine and the shareholders, but there's also silence on the part of the government. We were there earlier this week, and we found that mine tailings continue to stream down the rivers. There is no indication, and we've received no assurances from government what they've done to stop the further pollution, what they are doing to clear up the environment. And in fact, one of the most important questions which government claims to be answering is whether it's safe to move back into that area. And by safe, I mean, is it safe to move into an area that has been heavily contaminated with toxic metals and sludge? That question isn't answered. And apparently, Jagersfontein Developments says, well, where we're going to build your house depends on what the government's answer is to that question. But unless that information is disclosed to community members, they can't make an informed decision for themselves. So they are sitting, waiting for government to give the mine the all clear to build new houses for them. But the community itself has no insight into just how dangerous and unhealthy this environment might be. We're in the hands of a government that really isn't disclosing anything at all.
It's almost as though history is repeating itself, where government is not really engaging or getting involved in trying to assist these communities. I know it's a very different situation, but if you look at what's happened in KZN, where families are still waiting to be placed after those devastating floods months later, and now you almost have a similar situation where you have desperate people saying, we don't know what to do. They're now possibly going to be forced to sign this settlement. And you raise an important point where you say, is it even safe to start rebuilding again, or are we going to have a repeat? What has your engagement been like with government? Surely they should be communicating something, and maybe that something is not what we want to hear, and maybe it's just not proactive. But what have they been telling you?
Well, government has wide powers under the National Environmental Management Act to compel the mine to take certain measures to stop the pollution and to clean up the place and give redress to people who are affected by it. The mine says that the Department of Water Affairs and the Free State Department of Environmental Affairs has issued a series of directives to the mine, but refused to disclose what those directives are. We've asked government to disclose what directives it's issued so that we know what is being done and what the mine is doing and what people can expect. They've declined to do so. We were compelled to issue a promotion of access to information request, which we did about 4 weeks ago, requesting insight into the directives that were issued. But those have not yet been supplied to us. So even when we go through the regulated route about getting information, the information is not forthcoming.
It's such an indictment on government. It's actually unacceptable. But we thank you for the work that you're doing, and hopefully nobody's going to be forced into signing a settlement that's really going to cost these people and residents instead of actually helping them. So we'll just check in with you in the week to see what the latest is. Thank you so much for your time this evening. That was human rights attorney Richard Spoor.